Hey everybody, Josh Sheridan here with the Barely Legal Podcast. On today's show, we have a colleague of mine, a friend, a nominee for, what group are you running for?
Group 31.
Group 31 for the Circuit Bench
Circuit Bench.
in Hillsborough County. Greg Green. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Greg.
Thanks for having me.
So I know you from years of litigating against you. I know this is not your first time running locally. Is it your second?
It's my second time running.
Okay.
Yes.
And the elections are coming up in August?
August will be the primary. We hope that that's the end of the election. I'm in a judicial race, so in a judicial race, if you get 50% plus one at that August election, you are done. If there's two people in the race, you're done at that point. If there are three or more and the top candidate doesn't get that 50% plus one, then there's a runoff in November with the top two that will go to the runoff.
And isn't that what happened to you last time?
That is absolutely what happened to me last time. I actually won the primary. I had just under 45%, right at 45%, so I was 5% away from not needing a runoff. Then I got in the runoff, and I actually ended up losing in the runoff. So.
Okay. Well, I would like to kind of go back and then make our way towards present day and what's on the horizon. So I think we're about the same age. How old are you?
I just turned 46 last week.
Okay, so I'm a little bit younger than you. Where were you born?
Here, I'm actually a seventh generation Tampa native.
That's pretty rare. I have a group that I'm in, Trusted Advisors, and there's an attorney in there named Tyler Young, and he's 13th generation.
Wow.
Yeah, like you could trace him all the way back to the boats landing almost.
Yeah, we can trace back to the American Indians.
Oh,
That's
wow.
as far back as we can go.
So what is green? What's your...
That's all over from Europe. So when I talk about the generations that are tied to Tampa, that's my mom's side. That's Campbell. Green is all over, Europe, Ireland, all that kind of stuff. That's Dad.
Okay. And are you an only child, or do you have siblings?
I have two half brothers, but I'm the only child from my mom.
Okay. And so you were born and raised in Florida. Did you say Tampa?
Tampa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where'd you go to school?
For high school, I went to Chamberlain.
Okay.
They've changed the name of my elementary school. From 1st to 8th grade, I went to a place called Seminole Presbyterian, which is now, don't know why, called Cambridge Christian.
Huh.
Yeah.
They converted at some point along the way.
It's more formal sounding.
Right. And so in high school, you said Chamberlain?
Chamberlain,
And then what about college?
Went to USF for undergrad, and then went to Florida State for law. So really, again, haven't left very much.
What was your major in college?
Psychology, which comes in very handy for work
family
that
law.
You know that I do, right?
Yeah.
Family law, I use my psychology degree every day.
Was law in the cards even back then, or is that something you kind of came upon after college?
No, kind of funny story. So I'm going through USF, have really good grades, doing very well. Was gonna minor in poli-sci, and wasn't planning ahead for anything. And I never will forget, I met with my guidance counselor right before my senior year, and he said, "So what are you going to do with a psychology degree?" And I said, "I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to go get a job." "No, you're not. You have to have advanced degrees to do something with psychology." And then he looked at my transcripts and saw that I was doing very well in legal classes. Math is not my forte.
That's almost the common denominator for all attorneys.
For all of us, right?
Hence forensic accountants and
exactly
quadro specialists.
So he said, "What about law school? No math? And I was taking logic classes just by chance. And he said, the LSAT's all logic, a lot of reading and writing. You do really well in that." And so I said, "All right, let me look into that." And the next thing I knew, I was taking the LSAT and in law school.
How were your academics as a kid? Were you more of a school guy? Were you a sports guy? Were you a recluse? Were you social? How?
I was a sports guy. And that'll kind of tie into some of the stuff I do now. I played football and basketball pretty much since I was 6 years old.
Okay.
Stopped playing football my senior year in high school. Just played basketball. Had some offers to go play at very small schools up north.
Oh, wow.
Very small schools. And
what position did you play?
Point guard. I'm little.
Okay.
I'm 5'10".
You're fast and good. Yeah.
I'm quick. So yeah, my mom basically kind of tricked me. I don't want to say tricked me. It was a good thing, because I was always fine academically, but I was never knocking it out of the park. and she was worried if I went up north, might not play a whole lot. Certainly would probably spend a whole lot more time worried about basketball than college. So she made a deal. You go to USF, which is local. Back then, USF was not near as expensive as it is now.
What years were you at USF?
92 to 96.
So you're probably there about the same time as my wife and her family. They all the Basiglios
Yeah,
were kind of
yep, I know the Basiglios.
spread throughout the USF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she was like, yeah, you maintain A's and nothing but A's, I'll pay for it. So I was like, that seems like a good deal.
Yeah.
Took it. And then that's when, I really kind of focused on, let's make sure the grades are right. We're not going to be able to play sports forever. Sports are fun. But most of my good friends from high school and college did go a different route. They went into teaching and coaching.
Right.
And one of the big things I do extracurricular-wise, and I should just kind of community service because it's all volunteer for me, is I coach at local high school.
What high school?
Robinson.
Okay, I think that's by my house. Is that like
South of Gandy?
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm over in the Ballast Point area.
Yep.
So college straight A's. Does that mean you had no girlfriends for the entirety of college?
Oh no, I had girlfriends. I had girlfriends.
I never found a way to balance those two things.
I learned how to manage time with very little sleep. And
Oh.
that has come in handy on the campaign trail.
I would say if there's a talent that would help you in both this profession and a judge, that would be a good one.
Yeah, it is.
So then, did you apply to a bunch of schools, or did you know FSU was where you wanted to go?
I applied to, I think I looked this up recently. I applied to like 8.
Okay.
Some of them were your quote unquote safety schools.
Right.
But I always knew FSU was where I wanted to go.
And why is that?
Kind of grew up an FSU football fan, was looking into their law school, was very good law school at the time. It was also far enough, I wanted to get away from Tampa. I had been in Tampa my whole life. It was far enough away, 4-hour drive,
Right.
that I was, far enough away that I wasn't going to have people just popping in from Tampa. But also I wanted to stay in the state of Florida because, when you're coming back to get jobs and when you're trying to move forward in your legal career, where you grew up sometimes matters.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it was the perfect distance, perfect school, and it worked out great. And I actually ended up, one of my high school best friends went to undergrad at Mercer, and he was applying to law school at the same time, and we both got into Florida State.
wow.
So we actually reconnected and were roommates in law
That's
school.
awesome. Kind of have someone to keep you honest while
Yep.
you're there. That's
It was
very
good.
cool. And so when you graduated, did you know you were coming back to Tampa, or were you not sure where you were going?
Oh, no, I knew I was coming back. Actually, in between my junior and senior year, I did an externship with the state attorney's office here locally, which is basically free work for the state attorney's office. I was working 50 hours a week, and I got class credit for it, no money. And it's really actually kind of doing the job as an assistant state attorney. You have a supervisor that's with you in court all the time, but it's preparing you for that job. And if you do well, most of the people who did well were offered a job. You graduate, you pass the bar, you have a job here. So
yeah,
I
I
knew
did the
was
same
coming
thing
back.
in Pinellas. I did 3 years over there after a 6-month internship. So you worked under Mark Ober for a period of time.
First, I was under Judge
Oh, really?
Coe. Yeah, so I started. I graduated law school in '98. Got the job right after that, December of '98. Started it when I passed the bar in '99 officially, and I think Judge Coe passed away in late '99 or 2000. And then yes, I did work for Mark too.
And how'd you like doing criminal prosecution?
Loved it. It's kind of the wild, wild west. You're in court all day, every day.
A lot of trial experience for sure.
Ton of trial experience. You learn your way around the courtroom, and it's probably I've told this story a lot. It's I think one of the reasons that I'm sitting here running for judge right now is that experience of being in front of a judge all day, every day with trial experience, and some of the people that were around me. My first supervisor was Judge Loeffler.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first people that I was in charge of training was Judge Peroni.
Oh, wow.
Judge Shanti was a trial partner. The list goes on.
I didn't
and
realize
on and
Judge Shanti was a prosecutor there.
on. Yeah, he was a prosecutor when I was.
Okay. So then when you left, did you know you were wanting to go into family law, or what came next for you?
No. So when I left, I actually left with Norman Cannella Jr. and a guy named Roger Bright. We were doing nothing but criminal law.
Were you working with him when he was doing Bubba Love Sponge stuff?
That was our first big case.
Okay.
So Bubba actually hired Norman Sr. as well as our firm. So that was kind of our first big case that really kind of helped get things going.
That wasn't the pig case, was it?
That was the pig case.
All right. For the listeners who might not know, can you Give just a little overview on the pig case.
So the pig case was, and again, this was probably 2002 or 2003. Forgive me for not knowing, but Bubba did an on-air sort of radio stunt where they captured a wild boar, they killed it, they did a cookout, they fed meat to everyone, and he was charged with animal cruelty.
Was this at the office that Regina Hunter's at now, or is this at a different place?
I think it might be.
Yeah.
I think it might be.
Okay.
So he got charged with that. And that's when we, like I said, that was kind of, I think we were out in private practice for about 6 months when that happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did that go to trial?
You know, so we were really secondary. We were helping Norman Sr. a
Right.
lot. If I remember correctly, it did go to trial and it was just, we got a not guilty, but don't hold me to
Sure,
that.
yeah.
The memory gets,
No,
it's
I'm with
tainted.
you. I vaguely recall it from listening to the show.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway. But I remember you would always hear Hazlitt, Diaco, and Canella. Those were the
Yep. That's for
attorneys
them.
you would always kind of hear
Yeah.
circling each other in the Bubba the Love Sponge spear. So you went out with Norm Canella and this other, what did you say, Roger Bright?
Yep.
And so you were doing criminal defense.
Doing nothing but criminal defense because that's what we knew, right? That's what we all know. So we go out and do what we know. And Norman's still a great friend, has been very supportive of the campaign. Roger's actually a teacher now.
Oh, wow.
He moved on. And I just knew that solely criminal defense was not my future. I wanted to branch out. So I actually took a job back in sort of prosecution. I went to the Attorney General's office and did termination of parental rights.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I only did it for a year.
Oh,
It
well,
was very
God, if a year is 10 years in that field.
It is. It's highly emotional, and it had that family sort of touch to it. And then a lawyer who's been in practice forever, he's actually now of counsel to me, Raymond Pines.
Sure, I know Ray well.
Ray's been in this community for 40 plus years, saw me there and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm trying to learn something new." And he goes, "All right, well, you're just going to come work for me because here's what's new. I do family law." And he said, "It's not that bad." And I said, "Okay, I want to learn something new anyways." And he was we were doing some criminal defense at the time, so something I knew. And that was in 2007. That's how long ago that was. And it just kind of happens. Your practice kind of morphs.
Sure.
And it morphed into pretty much solely a family law practice. And now fast forward to today, I think I have about 50 active cases and 49 of them are family law. One of them is criminal.
Now, there's been some iterations of your practice in recent years, if I'm correct. You've kind of had different attorneys, either as partners or associates, working with you. Can you go through that a little bit?
Sure. So I was with Ray and I were together alone probably up until about 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to work with Seth Nelson and Nelson, PA. That didn't work for a lot of reasons. Seth is just a good friend. It was a business decision that
Sure.
we moved on. But Ray wanted to step back at the time, so he was kind of the owner of the firm. But he said, "Look, it's time for you to take over the firm. I'm not going to be practicing forever." So when we went back out, that's what happened. It kind of became my firm, and Ray was of counsel. We partnered with Mary Quinn, and I had Catherine Lynch as an associate.
Both are great attorneys.
Awesome attorneys.
Yeah,
and,
good team.
And then we had what I call the "you're going to win" effect. I kept hearing that from everyone. Well, you're going to win. You're going to win. Well, you've won the primary. It's going to happen.
Okay. I want to back up because that's a big part of your story. I want to know, what is it that drove you to make the decision to run in the first place?
So backing up to what I said, I think
Yeah.
it was always in my head. This is something that I wanted.
So this was
to.
part of the plan long term.
It really probably came part of the plan 5 or 6 years ago. Before that, it was always, hey, I respect some of these judges that I've been in front of, and I'm sure we're going to get into this. Some of them you look at and you go, wow, I would do this 1,000 times different than the way they're doing it. And one of the big things for me was experience. I always looked, the judges that I was in front of that I truly admired all had at least 2 decades of practicing. So when I really started thinking about it, which was probably 6 years ago, I wasn't there. And I felt like I had that number in my head, and I was learning something new every day. I was actually, in 2007, learning a whole different area of practice. And so then it kind of became something that I was thinking about, and I told this story to someone. So I guess it would have been 4 years ago was when I was really serious about it. And Judge Valkenburg was running against Shelton Bridges. And at the time, Judge Valkenburg was not in the race.
Right.
but I actually met with a consultant, had paperwork in hand, and was getting ready to do it then, and it just didn't feel right. Called my wife. She was like, "Are we sure?" Prayed about it, and sure enough, Miriam got in the race 2 days later, and I probably would not have wanted to run against her. I don't know if she would have got in if I got in. So the timing wasn't right. And then 2 years ago, actually, I got a call from two judges pretty much on the same day saying, it's time. You've been thinking about this long enough. You've got your 2 decades. Your temperament's great. You've got to get in a race. And I looked at a race and said, well, that's the one I'm going to go get in.
How do you decide which one you're going to get in?
A lot of it is who you want to run against,
right?
Because at the time, there were some people in the other races that I was friends with that I thought would be very good judges. And the race that I got in was Adam Bantner was the only person in it. And
okay.
I had heard of Adam, but I didn't know him.
Okay.
So it wasn't that I was going to be stepping on a friend's toes that, hey, I'm now running against you. So that's, it was nothing more than that. It was a seat that we knew the judge was retiring. We knew Adam was in it. And I didn't know Adam that well. And then I just kind of looked at, well, what do I think Adam has, and what can I differentiate myself from Adam? And that's when I got in.
And this was the time before?
This was the time before.
And was that an opening of a seat or a new seat?
That was an opening of a seat. So it was, yes, the judge was retiring that held
Which
that
judge
seat.
was that? Don't remember. It's okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've kind of put that out of my
head. Well, if you think of it later, you'll let me know. So this seat that you're running for, is it an opening of a seat or a new seat?
Same thing, yeah. So this is Judge Nielsen is retiring.
Oh, okay, yeah. I remember Judge Nielsen.
Yep, Judge Nielsen did some time in family law. He is retiring. He's not seeking re-election. So one of the things that I had to decide after the defeat in the general was I going to do this again? And it took a while to come to that conclusion. I think a lot of that's just emotion, but when I really said, hey, look, this is something I want, I think it's something the community is behind, with the support that I had the last time, then the question was, how quickly do you do this, and how do you identify a seat?
Right.
So what I actually did is tried to figure out who might be retiring, and then went and started trying to verify that with them, and we got verification that Judge Nielsen was not going to seek re-election, and then I was the first person to get in that race. I got in May of 2019.
So you're what, 9 months in already?
9 months in, yes.
And you've got, I know you're married and you have one or two kids?
2 girls.
Okay. So, I have 2 kids myself, married, and I can't possibly imagine how you fit running into your schedule on top of being a husband, being a father, being a business owner, being a family law attorney. There's only so much of you to go around. So, figuring out, I think you mentioned earlier, you're good at time management, but not only that, but just how to manage yourself and kind of touch all of those responsibilities in a way that's meaningful to each of them and get the job done. Have you learned from the first time to this time?
I have. So the thing that suffered the most was health.
Oh, God.
I gained a ton of weight.
Sure.
I gained a ton of weight because there was no time to work out. There was no time to worry about that. So I'm trying to be, and when you're campaigning, we call it the rubber chicken circuit. You just go to lunch after dinner, and there's constantly food in front of you. So what I'm trying to manage much better this time is not eating certain places I go, not eating late, watching what I eat. That was the biggest thing because I gained more weight than I ever gained in my life, and I just didn't feel great. So I'm trying to maintain that. I kind of got it down pat from the first time in terms of how I manage my day. And the reality is a lot of the work that I used to get done during the day in terms of typing and emails, it gets done in the middle of the night now. It gets done after kids are asleep, after I've been a husband, after I've been daddy, and after I've campaigned, which, cuts back on the sleep. But you learn to function without sleep at some level.
Are you still carrying the same caseload that you had been?
Pretty much. So after that, Mary and Katie story is kind of where we left off. When they went to form their own firm,
right,
they obviously took a lot of cases with them. But pretty much every case that I was working on, I kept. I think maybe one didn't stay with me. So I've pretty much had that same caseload. I've been lucky that Ray is still of counsel with me. I've reached out to contract attorneys when I need help, and they're always willing to step in. But yeah, the caseload's pretty much remained consistent. And in fact, at the end of last year, it spiked to probably the highest it's ever been. It was Normally, and I'm sure you probably have the same thing, family law attorneys, we kind of suffer in November and December. No one likes to get divorced during the holidays, or at least start that procedure during the holidays. It was the exact opposite for me. I had people just banging down the door, let's get this rolling.
My experience is always the first 2 weeks of December. Well, Thanksgiving to about Christmas, it's slow. But for some reason, that week between Christmas and New Year's is bananas. Always that way for me. A lot of injunctions,
Yeah.
injunctions and a lot of other stuff. It just spikes during that time. And 100% I follow you. And we've been lucky the beginning of this year to pick back up. But yeah, that fourth quarter slump is always something you got to kind of budget for as far as financially, time wise. And then of course with kids, it's, they're on vacation, you're taking them on trips and all this other stuff. So it's definitely tough. Now, I interviewed another candidate last week, Leanne Gowdy, and she kind of gave me some information, so I can kind of piggyback off of that. Okay. I don't have to have you reteach me some of this stuff. But it's my understanding, is it in April that you have to finalize who's in each race?
Correct. That's qualifying. And we've actually had, so one of the questions I get a lot is who's in your race or who's in what race. And I tell people, if you want to know today, I'm happy to give you that information, but there is movement. In fact, we had movement yesterday.
Oh, yeah?
We had movement in a judicial race.
What happened?
Bill Yanger was running for a circuit court seat, and he then moved to the only county seat where a judge is retiring. So that happened yesterday.
Okay.
There's actually one of the people that's in my race now was in it before, withdrew her name, and is now back in. So
who's that?
Kelly Overfield is her name.
Okay.
So there's what I tell everyone is, in April, there's still, it's historically we've seen people that get in races but then they don't qualify. And that when we talk about April, that's qualifying. There is a relatively large fee that has to be paid at that point, or you have to have enough signatures to get your name on the ballot. So you really know who's in what race in April.
Okay. So it's, well, one of the things, and I've had this idea with the podcast, I'd like to speak with as many nominees as I could, because I just thought it's a great way for people who are interested to get to know, because I'm sure you know this, every time it's election, the week and 2 weeks before, my phone is just getting blown up from family and friends. Who should
Absolutely.
I vote for?
Yep.
And it's like, well, this is who I would vote for, but I don't know necessarily who you'd want to vote for. And, not everybody is quite so interested in these races, but those who are, I thought an hour conversation with the person to get to know them might be a great idea. But the point that I was making is, I've been trying to figure out who's running, and I still can't figure it out. I went on the Supervisor of Elections website, and they don't make it really easy. You were nice enough to give me some names, but I'm still not even entirely sure everybody's running. I've been told Shafino, Yanger, Gowdy, you, Danny Alvarez, Lindsay Alvarez. I'm drawing a blank, but the family law attorney is over in Dennis Hernandez's office.
Oh, Gary Dolgen.
Yes. So I have a concept, but in any event, it's a good point that you're making, that until that date, you never really know for sure.
You really don't know, yeah.
So how many people are in your race right now? 3?
Right now, there are 2 others, right.
Okay.
Right now.
So the one you mentioned, and who's the third?
A guy named Scott Bonavita.
See, I don't know either of those 2 other people.
And in all honesty, I don't really know them either.
Right.
And that, doesn't mean anything, but I don't really know either of my competitors that well. I have talked to Kelly before. Kelly does some family law.
Right.
I think she does other areas of law too, but she does some family law, so there's some crossover. At least we've connected once or twice. I don't know Scott at all.
Well, my goal in speaking to the nominees is kind of to give them an opportunity to explain, their view of the bench, what they think is important, and why they think that they would be good at it. But I kind of use my experience with the bench as kind of a jumping off point. And in asking the nominees questions, I'm going to do my best to kind of ask everybody the same questions, so that I'm not treating one person unfairly over the other. But I've always found that it takes a certain kind of person to want to be a judge, and maybe a couple of different certain types of person. And one of the traits that I often see, and this is where I'm not very happy with the results, is the ego component of it. And I'm not saying this is true of everyone, but some people, seek that seat for a position of power. And I was wondering what your view was on that, and how you've seen that, what your experience is, and how you might relate to that in your campaign.
I don't disagree. I think that there are certain judges who sought the seat for that, or they get there and that becomes a motivating factor for them to stay. You heard me talk about somebody that's been a litigator their whole life, and that's what I've been. I've experienced literally the gamut of every personality that you can pretty much see on the bench, and that's one of the things that is a turnoff for me.
Right.
People have actually said, well, then who do you admire? Who do you look to? I don't know if you ever practiced in front of Judge Bill Fuente, but he was as good as they got, in my opinion.
Right.
There was no power or no ego about what he was doing. He treated everyone with the same manner of respect and decorum. He was always prepared. I think that's such a big thing for judges, is to be prepared to the extent that you know what's coming in front of you. And if he didn't know, he was perfectly fine telling you, that's an issue I don't know, but I'm going to go research it, and I'll make sure that I do know the answer and give it to you in a form that you can digest. And that's what motivates me to run. We've even talked about, amongst so many friends, I think what you're describing is sometimes what gets referred to as the black robe syndrome.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm up here, I have the black robe. I don't even need to wear a robe. For me, it's about doing justice, and it's about making sure that everyone who comes in front of me gets treated fairly, and that we're looking at their case from a truly blank slate position. Tell me what your arguments are, and then let me make the calls where I'm allowed to make the calls.
Well, you used a word earlier, and it's a word that I often use when having this type of conversation with people. But for me, if I were to pick one factor that is the most important for me for a judge, it's temperament. I don't really quite care so much if you practice family law before. I don't even really care so much how prepared you are, and I know that might be somewhat controversial, but I think you'd agree with me that family law is just hard. It is hard, and especially for those judges who are running who haven't practiced it. I can't think of another area of law where there's such a breadth of knowledge that you have to have a mastery of.
Gotta know it all.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with finances, you're dealing with psychology of children, psychology of a marriage, domestic abuse, substance abuse, alimony, financial quadro. Yeah. I mean, it really just kind of covers a wide range of topics, and you have to have a mastery of it all. And so that's hard for that reason. But then it's just, there's the saying that's always criminal defense is bad people on their best behavior, and family law is good people on their worst behavior. I don't know whether or not I agree, but I would agree that you are seeing people at possibly the lowest point in their life, and that manifests itself in very ugly behavior. And oftentimes we as the attorney become kind of the figurehead or the whipping post for our client, for the opposing party, for the opposing counsel, for the judge. So it's just, in my experience, I do like what I do. I do feel like I'm helping, but it is a very difficult area of law to practice. And if you compound it by a judge who doesn't have the temperament, they don't have to have a sense of humor per se, but at least kind of keep it a civil proceeding, keep it, that communication can be had, that there's not, making matters worse. I don't know if you would agree. I mean, you use the word temperament, but how important do you think that is?
I agree with you. I think it's the most important trait a judge can have. And we probably are both biased because we spend so much time in family law, and we see when judges come in with a bad attitude,
right?
Just a bad attitude about being there. It only makes things worse, because it is probably the most contentious area of law that's out there. And what you need is somebody on the bench who's going to try and ratchet it down just a little bit. And the temperament and the attitude that they have when they come into work every day is so important. And one of the questions that I finally got an answer to, and we all know this as family law practitioners, is why do they give us all the new judges, right?
Wait, it's true.
It's true.
You kind of throw you right in the firing squad right off the bat.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's a vetting process or what it is.
So here's what I was told, and it makes sense. No matter how experienced of a lawyer you are, there's going to be a transition to becoming a judge. There's going to be a learning curve. You're now learning how to be a judge.
Right.
The one thing we don't have in family law or dependency, which is where a lot of new judges...
Cousin of family law.
Correct. We don't have juries.
Right.
So the thought process behind the judges who kind of put the new judges there is, you're going to learn how to be a new judge without having to deal with that second factor, which is the jury.
Right.
And I understand that, but yeah, then what we get to do is sort of
teach these judges,
teach these judges
about family law.
Here's what's family law, and then inevitably they don't want to be there, so they do their time, and then it's okay. I'm moving on to my next gig.
Right. So that's where the new seats are.
Right.
Well, it's funny because one of the things that I've experienced too, and there's a couple of judges that I won't say their names, but I picture when I'm saying this, is they fight tirelessly to get on the bench, and then they just seem miserable. And I think a big part of where you're at and everybody in your similar position is knowing what you're getting into. And I don't know how you do that. Like, you know it from the attorney side, but I don't know how much of the job do you really know as an attorney, not having been there. And have you thought about that? Have you taken any steps to kind of get a better idea of what you are getting into?
It's a big reason I'm running, because you heard me mention 3 judges that I worked with at the state attorney's office. There's more than that. There are judges that I've been friends with for a very long time. And as I started to think about this, they obviously weren't becoming judges early in my career. They were becoming judges at about that 10 to 12 year mark. Every one of them that's taken the bench, I've taken the time to go and talk to. And some of those discussions have been an hour. Some of them have been 4 days. What's this job really like? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? And then most importantly, look, don't just stroke my ego and say, yeah, you'd be great at it.
Yeah.
Do you think that my temperament suits this? Do you think that this is something that I should do? So I spent a lot of time trying to gather that information about what life is going to be like. And I don't know if you've heard this, but one of the biggest complaints that judges have about their daily lives is how isolated they are.
Right.
As practitioners, we get to go into the courtroom, and I see you, and I can spend 5 minutes with you, and I can talk with someone else, and we're all kind of, we're going to that central courthouse. We're interacting with clients a lot. Judges, the biggest complaint, like I've heard from them, is they do their job, they maintain their docket, and then they go and they're sort of isolated from everyone else.
Well, not only that, just ethically speaking, they kind of have to be.
Correct.
A lot of them are getting off of social media. You can't really go to lunch with your friends quite like you can. You can't exchange gifts. You can't, so even more than just what the job itself requires is the judicial ethics kind of require you to be removed a little bit from the bar.
Right.
So
because you don't want to give that appearance of, hey, somebody has that advantage when they walk in my courtroom. So you're absolutely right.
Right. So, well, as far as you go, I mean, I know you. I have a pretty good concept of you. I know you as a well-regarded practitioner of family law, and you've been doing it. You've hit the 20-year mark, so you're definitely esteemed in that regard. But what is it about yourself that makes you uniquely the best choice for this nomination?
So I kind of group it into 4 categories. I do think the experience matters. I think that right now the law is you only have to be a practicing attorney for 5 years to run for judge. And I think that's pretty low.
Yeah.
As I've said, most of the good judges that I saw were at that 20-year mark, and I'm 2 decades into this. So I think I have the experience which is necessary. Then I do think you need some diversity in terms of your practice, because you don't know where you're going to be. But the likelihood is that you're going to do multiple areas of law. And I think having that criminal background, being familiar with the criminal rules of procedure, and now, family law, we're the civil rules of procedure, and then we have our own little family rules. So understanding juries and non-jury trials, because again, judges are going to do both, I think that diversity really makes me uniquely qualified. And then I heard this so much when I ran the first time, and I'm hearing it again. We don't know anything about the judges. And a lot of people take that as, well, then it must not be that important of a position, so I just won't vote for it, or I'll just pick a name. And the reality is your judges are the only people that you're voting for that can take away your life, liberty, or property.
Right.
And when you're going in front of them, it's usually one of the most stressful times in your life, whether it be a criminal charge, a divorce, a contract dispute that you're getting sued on. So I think that judges are really the ultimate public servants, and you need to understand the community. You need to be involved in the community. So one of the big things that I talk about is my community service. I'm not just connected here because I grew up here, but I try and do as much as I can to make sure that I'm giving back to this community. I'm a big brother in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. I've been coaching girls flag football at Robinson. This will be my 9th year. I'm a marriage counselor at my church.
Oh, really?
That's a fun story.
Oh, wow.
And my pastor came to me 4 years ago, and we got to keep people out of your office.
Yeah.
Who's better than you
Yeah.
at doing that? So I've been doing that for a really long time, and it's very rewarding to be able to do that. And then I'm an attorney ad litem. And for those of the listeners that don't know, when a juvenile gets charged with a crime, if their parent doesn't show up in court, I'm on a list that goes, and basically it can never substitute for a parent, but I'm there to assist the child in more than just a legal capacity. I'm there to kind of help that child get through it while they have their own public defender that's usually assigned to the case. So I really think that giving back to the community and showing that you're committed to the community is important in a judicial race.
Is that all four? I'm trying to think. Experience,
the diversity, and the community service, which kind of ties into everything. So maybe it's three right now.
Well, and I'm only asking you that because there's questions that popped up in my mind based on each of those. So for the listeners who may not know, the circuit court judge position, what are the different areas that you can end up in circuit court as far as a judge?
Family law, which we obviously have talked about. Juvenile dependency. You can end up in circuit civil, so that's a civil dispute over money that's now we've had to change in law, $50,000 or greater. And then felonies, so basically any criminal charge that's a felony, which is the high, when you think of it, that's the more serious crime. Misdemeanor is the less serious, felony is the more serious crime.
Right. So you said you mentioned the charity that you're doing. Are you on the board, or are you working with anything like Friends of Joshua House, Metropolitan Ministries, anything like that?
I volunteer at Metropolitan Ministries, not really on the board of anything.
Okay.
Most of my and so here's my strong point.
Sure.
I've been coaching around kids. Most of my community service and what I do relates to kids and giving back to kids. That's why the Big Brother program is so important to me. I actually have had two little brothers. I'm getting ready. In fact, they called me yesterday. I'm getting ready to have my third. I do the school-based program where I go into the school and actually kind of help my little brother in the school. And that ties right into the coaching that I've been able to do. And then that ties into my work with the attorney ad litem's program, which again is kids. I think I just kind of connect, and I hope that I'm being able to show them something different than they've seen either in their home life or whatever's got them to a place where I'm intervening in their life.
So one other question, and I'll preface this by saying I'm not going to ask you about your politics, but it's about politics and the degree to which you think it does or does not enter into sitting as a judge. It's an apolitical position, so not like certain other elections where you're a Dem or you're a Republican or any of that sort of thing. But and I was explaining this to Leanne when I interviewed her last week, but I do think, even though it's not supposed to, it plays a role in some judges, and especially in family law, where under 6113 we've got the factors that the court's supposed to consider when deciding what to do with the children. And there's those ones about the moral fitness of a parent, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, like that. And I have experienced this. This was the question I wanted to get to because you mentioned continuity. The idea is that no matter what courtroom you're in, you should be treated generally the same way.
Correct.
But that's not my experience always. There's certain judges that if you have this issue in front of, it's likely going to go this way, or if you're in front of these judges, it's going to go this way. And one that I've kind of had a disparity of treatment on is marijuana use. I've seen some judges, treat it as though it's the worst thing ever, and I've had other judges that say, were you guys doing this during the marriage? Is this a problem during the marriage, or were you both kind of living this lifestyle, and just now that you guys are no longer getting along, now it's a big issue? So well, I'll ask a two-parter. Have you experienced where kind of the ethical perspective or the moral perspective of the judge kind of changes how they interpret those factors and implement them in your cases? Have you noticed that?
I don't know that I think I attribute it to just the difference in the judge. I think you've probably taken it to the next level, which is, hey, are politics playing into this? And they very well may be. I think a lot of that is knowing your judge, right? One of the things that I'm sure you do when a client comes in is if you have a filed case.
First thing I do is look for the judge.
Right,
yeah.
You look for the judge because you want to know your judge, and you want to be able to tell your client, okay, this judge kind of does this as it relates to whatever issue.
Right.
So I think potentially there could be some politics in play there, but I think it's more about the judge's sort of personal beliefs about everything. Because what I tell every client, and you know this, is they're still people. At the end of the day, they're still people. And I think this ties into your question. It was actually one of the biggest things we get questioned about on the campaign trail is criminal law, because that's what people know. That's what people sink their teeth into. And the general public, I think, has a misperception that judges have all this leeway when it comes to criminal law, and that they're making decisions because when you really boil it down, usually juries are deciding guilt or innocence,
Sure.
and then there's score sheets where there's ranges, and you have minimum mandatories and certain things. So usually, if a judge is sentencing, they're following guidelines that have been set down by the legislature. You mentioned 6113. I think judges have more leeway and gray area to impose what they believe sort of fits this family and family law than anywhere.
Right.
Because you give us these factors and you say, well, here's what you got to follow, but that's it. There's nothing other than the factors. There's no guideline about how do you apply this factor to the set of facts.
Right.
And that's where your judge and what they sort of believe as it relates to the family is going to play into what ultimately happens.
Well, and so another one, especially if you're going to end up on the criminal bench in circuit court, is the death penalty.
Yep.
So did you do any murder cases when you were at the state attorney's office?
Only sat and watched. So I left the state attorney's office before I got promoted to a felony chief, which is when you really start doing that. So no, only in watching them, never actually participated.
And what about in defense?
In defense, we had an attempted murder, but never an actual murder.
Okay. Because again, I like to think that I know my limits. And, one of the things that family law attorneys often do at a certain point is they go get mediation certified.
Yes.
All of a sudden, everybody's a mediator. I know that I would be an awful mediator. I also know that I would be an awful...
I don't think that.
Oh, well, I appreciate it, but...
Because a lot of that is temperament.
Well, yeah, and I got my Irish temperament that kind of shows itself at a certain point. But again, with the judge, I don't know that I could ever do circuit because I'm not pro death penalty, and finding myself in a position where that may have to be a sentence that I impose. I mean, that's something that I think about, and I'm not going to ask you your position on that, but. These are the things that, even though the public isn't supposed to consider the politics, it's not made a part of the campaign. I do think it's got to play a role in kind of.
I think it should play a role in whether you seek the position.
Sure,
right?
Well, 100%.
These are questions that you need to ask yourself, and you need to be prepared to, as we all say, and sometimes people get upset with us about this answer, is follow the law.
Right.
So many of the questions we get really. I direct back to the legislature. What they're really asking me is, isn't this law terrible?
Right.
And I'm telling them, that's not for me to decide.
Yeah.
That's where you need to go call your state legislature and say, this law is terrible, so I don't have to enforce it.
That's right. So how has your family been through the second attempt at this? Is your wife working? Is she at home or?
Yeah, so I'd like to run my wife. She's the brains of the family.
Yeah, okay.
She's an engineer and an auditor.
Oh, wow.
She works for Lockheed Martin. She's been with Lockheed Martin forever. She is a rock star. She is one of the biggest reasons I'm doing this again. I thought for sure that after the first campaign, she was going to say, well, we gave that the old college try. And I talked a little bit about this, but I was the only lawyer that ran the last time that received every endorsement you could get. It was a campaign I set out. I said I had goals. We need to raise money through our campaign committee. We met all those goals. We got all the endorsements that we thought we needed. And then I went everywhere where I thought I needed to go, and we still came up short. So when I looked at that, I said, all right, so what do we do better? And I was struggling with what we do better. We've implemented some of those things, and I won't give that away.
No, I'm not going to ask you that.
That
sure.
strategy, but one of the motivating factors was about a month after, and I'm saying this in jest for all the listeners, my wife looked at me and goes, if you don't do this again, I'm going to divorce you.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's not an option.
Yeah.
And her point was, as an engineer, not someone that's a lawyer, and your wife's a lawyer, so
right.
She gets to see you in action. My wife she just heard he's really good at what he does, but
right.
Then she kind of got to see and talk to people on the campaign trail and see all these endorsements and have everyone say, he's really qualified. This is where he should be. And when that happened, she said, we're not giving up on this. This is where you deserve to be.
That's awesome. I mean, that's so important, in
huge.
everything you do, to have that approval of your spouse. As far as your kids, how old are they?
5 and 3.
And do they like kind of this part of it? Are they out there pounding the pavement? Are they helping seal envelopes and do all that kind of
This
stuff?
time, so last time it was then
bit younger, yeah.
they were what, 4-2 or 3-1. So Skylar is the oldest and Sage is the youngest. It's so funny. The timing of this question is great. We just did the MLK parade
Sure.
on Wednesday. And so they walked in the parade, and the last couple times they've been in parades, they were very shy, very to themselves, just kind of either sat in the car that we had following us or sat in their stroller. This time, Dad, give me beads, going up, talking to voters. There were cops that lined the parade route. They went up to every officer, vote for my dad. It was so neat to see.
Yeah.
I think they're going to be active campaign participants this time because they want to be.
I hope this is okay to ask. Your wife
Sure.
is African American, isn't she?
She is.
So you guys have been a part of that parade and been a part of that world, and you've gotten to
Yep.
experience that, which maybe you would not any comment on you personally, but it definitely opens you up to a whole other part of the community that maybe we don't normally have an opportunity to see unless you're actively seeking it out.
True.
Has that informed who you are at all as an attorney? Do you think?
Oh yeah, your spouse, regardless of race, creed, I think that certainly shapes who you are.
Right,
So, yeah.
right. So, do things start ramping up in April once you know who's qualified?
They have already ramped
Are
up.
you full speed now, or
I'm
is there an
full speed.
escalation over
No,
time?
I'm full speed. So what happens from, again, just sort of experience and doing it before and I actually have really 3 campaign consultants, 2 that are full-time, one that's in charge sort of everything, and then there's one that is secondary, and then there's one that's probably going to help with media. And we map all this out. It's January's here. There's no more time to just do this at 30 or 60%. So it's since pretty much the beginning of the year, I've been full-time campaign and full-time work, which is why the sleep is now gone. And in fact, we have an event tonight.
Please announce events.
Yeah.
We're getting to that
Okay.
point. I want to ask you
Sure.
about events where people can come and hear you. I want to ask where they can find you online, social media, and all
Sure.
that sort of thing.
I don't know if they'll hear this tonight, but if
They won't hear it tonight, but
Yeah,
we'll
so,
try and
all
get it
right.
out there quickly.
it'll be, you can catch on to the next one. But tonight
Yeah.
we have an event at Ducky's.
Okay.
That's 5:30 to 7:30. In terms of finding me, you can find me on greggreen4judge.com, and that's FOR, not the number 4. And then Greg Green on Facebook. Those are the 2 easiest places to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for stopping by. It was a
Yeah,
pleasure
thanks for
having you
having
here
me.
and getting to hear kind of your take on this enterprise that you've entered into. And I'll leave you with this on the temperament part. I think you've got a lock on it because
Thank you.
my experience with you has always been a pleasure under the circumstances. Very professional, very knowledgeable, and keeping things kind of where they need to be. So I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, take care, Greg.